Hello, and welcome to our discussion of marketing research. And we're going to do several things in this particular discussion. We're going to define what's meant by marketing research. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about why organizations um, might want to do marketing research. And then we're going to spend the majority of time focusing on the marketing research process. And following this particular process does not guarantee success in marketing research, but what it does is it reduces the chances of failure. It increases the chances of success. Doesn't guarantee success, but it increases the chances of a success and reduces the chances of failure. So, a definition of marketing research is the systematic design, collection, analysis, and reporting of data relevant to a situation facing an organization. So again, the systematic design, collection, analysis, and reporting of data relevant to a situation facing an organization. And there's a lot of stuff going on in that particular definition. And that provides a nice lead in to kind of why organizations would want to do marketing research. And the bottom line with marketing research is very simply that organizations should look at marketing research as being able to provide information to help managers make decisions. Okay, real simple. Provide information to help managers make decisions. Okay. And the challenge is that the devil, like a lot of things, the devil is in the details, right? And and one of the reasons this is so important is that the marketing research, if you go back to the definition that we talked about, the systematic design, collection, analysis, and reporting of data, right? There's a number of steps involved there, right? Expensive, time consuming. And, you know, the question that needs to be asked is if an organization is going to spend a lot of time and a lot of resources conducting marketing research, if basically at the end of doing the marketing research, the organization decides, what the heck, right? We don't need this. The organization has uh, wasted time and wasted money. And from a marketing perspective, the latter is important because anytime you're adding cost to a situation, those costs have to be recouped or should be recouped in the price of a product. So something that you're unnecessarily spending money on, right, that you really don't need to do, right? Well, then don't do it. I mean, there's no law, right? One of the Ten Commandments is not, Moses, when Moses got the Ten Commandments, one of the Ten Commandments was not, organizations must do marketing research. And so I have an example to kind of illustrate an organization that did marketing research that basically didn't use the information and as a result ended up just spending a lot of money. And that organization is, yes, John Carroll University. And so a number of years ago, one of the former presidents of the university put together a university marketing committee, and I happen to be on the university marketing committee. Go figure that somebody who teaches marketing would be on a marketing committee. And the committee decided that what we needed to do, we couldn't do. So we went out and hired an organization to conduct a marketing research or do marketing research on John Carroll. It's a pretty well-known organization. I'm not going to mention the name. It probably wouldn't ring a bell for you. But just, if you've ever seen the MasterCard Priceless commercials or the Intel Inside campaign, that's a company that came up with the MasterCard Priceless tagline as well as the Intel Inside thing. And so this is a top-notch company, and it went and the university paid between $150,000 and $200,000 for this company to conduct marketing research about John Carroll. And when all was said and done, some of the higher ups at John Carroll decided that they didn't like what the research showed, so they just kind of took the report and literally put it on a shelf, and nothing was ever done based on what that report said. So, all the time, all the money that was spent was just, it was absolutely worthless because nothing ever happened because of it. So again, right, if an organization thinks that it wants to do marketing research or believes that it needs to do marketing research, it's got to be honest with itself and say, look, despite what we might find out, are we willing to take the stuff that we find from the marketing research and allow our managers to use that to make decisions, and hopefully make decisions that are in the best interest of the organization. All right. So there is a marketing research process, and it's a sequential kind of thing. And basically what can happen is, if you screw up, right, if you screw up the first part, right, or the first phase, it doesn't matter if you do the rest of the stuff really well, right? So if you screw up the first phase, if you do a really good job with the second phase and the third phase and stuff like that, doesn't make any difference because you've screwed up the first phase. And so the first phase, or the first stage of the marketing research problem, is to define the problem. You go, wow, I'm sure glad I'm paying $725 a credit hour for this, right? Or $825 a credit hour, or whatever it is. Right? You go, oh my God, define the problem. And again, as I said earlier, the devil's in the details, right? The devil's in the details. And you say, well, what do you mean the devil's in the details? So you're sitting there, your organization, you go, you know what? Our problem is that we're losing money. That's not a problem, right? Because you can ask a question, a very simple question. Why? Why is our organization losing money? Well, our organization is losing money because revenues are less than cost, right? Okay, so why are revenues less than cost? And my point is that an organization that might say our problem is we're losing money, right? They're identifying the symptom, right? It's kind of like when you go to a medical doctor, right? The medical doctor is looking for the problem. The medical doctor isn't looking for the symptoms because, right, the symptoms are important, but the old saying goes, if you treat the symptoms, the problem might remain, right? Same thing is true in marketing research, right? If you basically define the symptoms, right, the stuff that comes afterwards, right, the stages that come afterwards, you're basically focusing on the symptoms, and when you get to the end, the problem might still be there. So it becomes really important, right, to be able to define and correctly define the problem. So assuming that we can define the problem, the next phase involves developing the research plan. And the research plan, a variety of things associated with the research plan, but one aspect is to try to figure out the kind of data that you're going to need to address the problem. And if you're going to need to collect the data, what kind of data are you, going to collect, and how are you going to collect it? So once you've defined the problem, whatever the problem is, you develop a research plan that lays out the kind of data that's going to be needed to address the problem, and then how are you going to collect the data? So, for example, if you go back to the study that was done at John Carroll by the outside organization. They used a little bit of historical stuff, but they did a lot of what is known as primary research, which we'll talk about in a minute. Because in order to kind of answer the questions that they thought represented the problem, they believed that extensive collection of primary data was needed. That's the kind of stuff that, if you've defined the problem well, right, developing the research plan should give you a sense for kind of the game plan of how you're going to go and get the data that you need to help answer the problem or address the problem. And so once we've developed a research plan, then there's a stronger focus. The next phase involves data collection. And data collection, comes down to a blend sometimes, or maybe it's exclusively what's known as secondary data, which is data that already exists, data that's been collected for some other purpose, right? Um, there's also what is known as primary data, and that is data that's specifically collected to address the problem at hand. Um, and so, right, for example, if we go back to the marketing research study of John Carroll, the organization that was conducting the marketing research, it was asking people, various constituencies, students, parents, faculty, alumni, right, employers, things of that nature, asking them questions about, what do you think about John Carroll? Well, that's not something that they could easily maybe find in secondary data. Right? They needed to go out and they needed to sit down and have maybe face-to-face interviews with people to find this information out. So again, secondary data is data that already exists. It's been collected for some other purpose, and sometimes secondary data is sufficient to address the problem that was identified in the initial stage of the marketing research process. Oftentimes it isn't. But sometimes it is. And there are different kinds of secondary data that can be used, right? There's what's known as internal secondary data, and that's secondary data that is internal to a firm, right? There's also external secondary data, and that's data that are outside the firm. Okay. And you say, well, what do you mean by, well, for internal secondary data, for example, if you look at John Carroll, a piece of internal secondary data might be, the number of students that are enrolled at John Carroll every year. Right? That would be internal to the university. External secondary data on the same issue would be the number of people enrolled in colleges in the United States during a particular year. Right? So there's internal secondary data. There's external secondary data. There's also public secondary data. That's secondary data that an organization or an individual can can acquire and doesn't have to pay for it. So, for example, in the United States, the federal government, the U.S. federal government, is a treasure trove of free data, right? And in fact, in 2 more years, right, in 2020, we're going to do the annual or the every 10-year census, and the government, where the U.S. government collects a tremendous amount of information about the U.S. population. That data, all that data that's collected by the U.S. government, you and I, and if you work for a company, you can go and you can get that information. You don't have to pay anything for it, right? There's also what's known as proprietary secondary data, and that is secondary data that exists, but that you have to pay for. And you say, why would I do that? Well, sometimes because the people that are collecting the proprietary secondary information or secondary data, they have information that might be valuable to you, but you don't necessarily have that information, and you don't necessarily want to have to collect the information yourself in order to kind of find out what's going on. And so there are, for example, there are marketing research firms out there who will, for a fee, right, provide organizations information about specific topics. And you're actually going to do a discussion topic down the line where we're going to use a publicly available, or at least part of a publicly available database, that if you were to pay money, you would be able to get a lot more data than the data that you're going to be able to get from the public portion of the database. We'll talk about it when we talk about market segmentation. And then there's primary data, which we talked about, the data that's specifically, or that's, yeah, it's data specifically collected to address the problem at hand. And there are a number of different ways to collect primary data, basically three. There's observation, there's survey, and there's experimentation. In the marketing realm, experimentation doesn't tend to be used as much as it is in the sciences. So some of you, may have a science background, and if you do an experiment in biology, right, that's what you're doing, right? You're doing an experiment to collect data that previously that doesn't exist. Experiments they don't tend to be heavily used in marketing research. It's not that they're never used, but they're not used a lot. So it comes down to oftentimes data is collected by either observation or by survey. And there are pluses and minuses to both collecting data by observation and survey. There are challenges, and this again is where the marketing research can become very costly and very time consuming. And if you're using, or if you're not familiar with, different kinds of, let's say, survey research techniques, or you don't understand maybe the pluses and minuses of observation, an organization can get into lots of trouble and maybe end up collecting inappropriate data, or not collect the data that it should be collecting. And so there's a lot of places, right? And just because, if we go back to the beginning, just because we've defined the problem well, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to do, a good job with developing the research plan. And even if we do a good job of developing the research plan, if we screw up the data collection, the stuff that comes after the data collection is kind of worthless, right? So again, this is a sequential thing. It's a funneling kind of thing, and that's why it's really important. You do the first step correctly, you do the second step correctly, you do the third step correctly, you do the fourth step correctly, and I have a little example at the end of where we had I was part of a marketing research project, and we had done everything okay until the last phase, and it just everything blew up. So once you've collected the data, the next phase, or the next step, or the next stage is to analyze and interpret the data. And this is where you go, oh God, Econ 207 or 8 or 9 or 10 or wherever the hell Econ it is. I mean, it's been so many things since I was at John Carroll. I think now it's Econ 208/2010, not 2010, 210, things of that nature. But it becomes important, right, when you're doing statistical analysis. It becomes important that you're using statistical analysis that's appropriate to the data, or the type of data that you're collecting. And so you might remember that there's the nominal, the ordinal, the interval and ratio level data, right? Remember that whole discussion. Well, if you have nominal data, you shouldn't be using things like means and modes and medians and things of that nature, right? In order to do statistical analysis. So again, right, you might have done a really nice job you might have done a good job of defining the problem and developing the research plan and collecting the data, and then you got the data, and then you go and you blow it by using inappropriate statistical techniques, or using the wrong using the correct technique but applying the technique incorrectly, if that makes any sense. And so you've done everything wonderfully up to now, and you go, yes, we're ready to. Yep, you're ready to write the report and interpret the findings. Okay, and remember a few minutes ago I said I would give you an example of a marketing research project that I was part of, where everything had gone, kind of according to Hoyle, as they say, up to the write the report and implement the findings. And so one of the key things to keep in mind when you're writing the report, right, is who is the audience. You say, the audience is the audience. I got that. This particular project goes back a long time, but there was a trucking company that called up the University of Maryland back in 1980, and they wanted us being the transportation group in the business school at the University of Maryland. They wanted us to help them to develop a model to figure out where to put their truck terminals. And so we didn't do primary research, but the problem was pretty much laid out. We did said, okay, here's the kind of stuff that we're going to need. We used a lot of internal secondary data from the company, and we had some external secondary data as well. We use some fairly sophisticated statistical techniques to analyze the data because the type of data we had was fine. And then it all blew up when we went to write the report, because the report was being presented to truckers, right? The CEO of the company, the vice president of marketing, the vice president of sales, and vice president of operations. And the faculty person who was in charge of the project, he decided that he was going to write an academic paper and not a paper that was appropriate for a group of truckers, right? And so he's talking about all sorts of things about about R squareds and the t-test for the coefficients in the regression equation. And we were using stepwise multiple regression, and he's using all this stuff, and oh my God, he just went on, and then you do this and this, you did blah blah blah. Right. The guys, all the trucking guys they wanted to know where to put the truck terminals. If I'm putting a truck terminal in Southern Virginia, do I put it in Richmond or do I put it in Roanoke? We didn't answer the question. Okay, we did not answer the question. So he had done everything really well up to that point, right? But failed to answer the question in the first place: where should we put our truck terminals? So, right, it's important to understand that, because what the written report should do, right, is it should address, right, the problem that you identified in the first step of the process. And when we did it back a long time ago with this particular study, we didn't. So we'll stop there and we'll see you down the road. Bye.